I've now had this, my EcoFlow Delta 3, for 6 months, and it's time to give you an update. Things have changed since my original review, so today I'll let you know the latest situation regarding this device. If you want to know if you should buy one, then stick with me. Hello everyone, I'm Andrew, and today I want to bring you an update on the EcoFlow Delta 3, the solar generator I bought myself back in May. I first reviewed this at the end of July 2025, after I'd owned it a couple of months. I wanted to wait until I'd been using it for a while, ensuring that I had got to thoroughly understand it and knew what it could and could not do. Even so, despite waiting that time, things have changed since the review, so it makes sense to release this update explaining what's new. I'll put a link on the end screen to the original review video I did, so you can watch that for context if needs be, but also to the video in which I explained why I wanted something like this. In other words, why I think the possibility of local power outages is a bit higher for the next couple of years. Those two will also be linked from the description, if that's easier for you. In those videos, I explained that I felt a little uncomfortable about being without any power in the event of a blackout. My original plan was to get solar and a battery installed at home and perhaps pay for the additional disconnect to enable it to continue to run during a blackout, something that's an optional extra. You don't get that by default. However, for several reasons, it's not been possible to go ahead with an installation thus far. So I started to look about for something else, something I could do without an installation, and stumbled upon solar generators. These are fairly expensive items. It's still not cheap to buy energy storage in any significant quantity, despite the speed at which lithium-ion batteries have reduced in price in the last 10 years. Having said that, there is money to be saved from owning energy storage at home. Because I'm an EV driver, I have a time of use electricity tariff. That gives me significantly cheaper electricity overnight, which is when I would normally charge the car. If I were able to use some storage to time shift energy I used in the house, then I could lower my bills. So I had a few main requirements. I wanted as much storage as I thought I would regularly use. It needed to be quiet, as it was going to sit in the living room, and I wanted to be able to time shift energy with it to save some money. The device needing to be quiet in use became an important differentiator. That's not something they all offer. Solar generators need active cooling, mostly for the power electronics, and a lot of them use numerous small fans. The problem with small fans is that they are often spun quite fast, and that makes them quite noisy, emitting a slightly annoying whine, which I would not be able to put up with long term. EcoFlow's Delta 3 is different. With this model, EcoFlow designed a much quieter cooling system, using larger fans running at slower speeds. So this fits the bill because I don't hear it at all when it's lightly loaded, which is the case in my setup. The other significant differentiator is that this solar generator offers a time of use mode, which is designed to do exactly what I wanted, namely time shifting energy. When enabled, it will automatically charge in my off-peak hours and then discharge during peak hours. The only problem was it turned out that the time of use mode didn't work. A quick bit of research online showed that there was a known bug in the device firmware, one which had existed for over a year at that point without a fix. That's a long time to go without firmware updates. Any firmware updates, it seemed. And while EcoFlow was promising to release a fix, each estimated date they gave the community came and went with no patch provided. Well, I'm glad to report that this has now finally changed. A firmware update was released towards the end of August, and I'm happy to report that it fixed the time of use mode. Interestingly, the release notes didn't mention the time of use bug having been resolved, but we knew that a fix had already been created because if you complained to EcoFlow support enough, they would trigger your device to update to a custom build that got it working. What was listed in the release notes was enough to suggest that the update would fix another frustration I had suffered, namely slow response to user interactions in the app when an expansion battery was added, a problem I also wanted to be rid of. So I gave the update a go, which failed the first time. That was a bit of a worry, as I wasn't sure if an update would brick the device, but it survived, and the upgrade worked fine the second time. It seems to offer a good improvement. Sure enough, the slow app responses are gone, and time of use mode works correctly. That means I no longer need the workaround I mentioned in the last video, a workaround that left me at risk of it going flat and my equipment turning off. So I'm happy about that. It needs much less monitoring now. With the risk of it going flat a distant memory, I can now cycle it more deeply each day and don't need to keep an eye on it. That's much better. Having said that, it's not perfect. Before the update, the device seemed to do a maintenance charge every once in a while. That's a full charge to 100%, which seemed to happen every couple of weeks or so, but not to a schedule I could identify. Because this uses LFP cells, an occasional maintenance charge is important. That chemistry requires the BMS to guess the state of charge, and the guess can slowly drift out of sync with the reality of the cell's actual state of charge. The thing about this maintenance charge is that it's not listed as a feature. There's nothing to say it will happen, but it did seem to happen before the upgrade and doesn't after it. I noticed that in my setup because I have an expansion battery. I got the additional 2 kWh Delta 2 Max Smart Extra battery to allow me to time shift more energy, and the state of charge of that drifts further and further from the main unit over time. However, it's not a major problem. It does mean that I'm cycling the expansion battery a bit deeper than the main battery, as the expansion battery always shows a lower state of charge than the main unit, but it's easy to correct with an occasional manual charge to 100%. I suspect a problem that might still exist is an issue with the HID mode, something associated with the use of its big brother, the Delta 3 Plus, as a UPS. A bug in the device firmware causes it to report several bits of invalid data down the USB link, a link that is supposed to be used to tell a connected device to shut down in the event that the battery runs low. That doesn't work well in all scenarios if it sends invalid data. I've not been able to test whether this is still an issue. That's because the HID mode is a feature only available on the Delta 3 Plus, the model above mine, and wasn't something I needed. It is notable, however, that there have been no updates to the Reddit posts talking about the problem since the firmware release, so I'm guessing that it's still an issue. You can get it to work in Linux under certain circumstances, but I suspect it still won't work on Windows. However, I should call out that a solar generator is not a true UPS anyway, whether that feature works or not. A proper UPS always converts the incoming mains to DC and then generates a new, clean, stable waveform at the output. Solar generators, however, share their power electronics between their AC to DC conversion and DC to AC functions, so they can only do one or the other. When charging a battery, they pass through power to the output using a relay, so they are not conditioning the main spikes to protect against voltage dips or spikes. If you need to protect sensitive equipment, including expensive computer servers, then you are better off getting a true UPS. UPSs with lithium-ion cells are more expensive than solar generators, but they do a better job of power conditioning. I should also call out the API documentation. Documentation for the Delta 3 is still not present on the EcoFlow site, so that does limit what control you can have over the device. Many other EcoFlow devices are documented, and because of that can be controlled by external software, such as plugins that developers have written for Home Assistant. Sadly, that's not the case for the Delta 3. In summary, I think the Delta 3 is a pretty good bit of hardware, and I draw some comfort from it having a 5-year warranty. What's more, the firmware has now been updated to resolve a number of its issues. However, my disappointment with EcoFlow's heavy-handed marketing remains, and the API documentation has not materialised, which limits what it can be used for a bit. Furthermore, there is no indication that the HID mode has been fixed on the 3 Plus, so maybe only rely on that for Linux-based devices using NUT. Have a read up on Reddit to get more detailed understanding if that's of benefit. Even then, you should bear in mind that something having a UPS mode does not make it a UPS. This will protect a device from a complete power cut, but it will not protect it from a power sag or any voltage spikes. I'm also conscious that we've had one firmware update, but we might not get another. That's fine if everything works, but if the HID mode isn't working on the 3 Plus, then it might not get fixed. It's possible that the new firmware we had deployed was for the benefit of us, the customers, but I think it's also possible it was for the benefit of EcoFlow themselves. That bug causing slow response in the app might have impacted the API's performance, and they might have been forced to add more hardware to run the API if they hadn't fixed that problem. I don't know that, of course. I have no information to say that, and I could be completely wrong. However, I remain healthily sceptical about the long-term support for the Delta 3, as there are still a few concerning signs. If you're watching this during the week of the video's launch at the end of November 2025, then now is a good time to consider buying a solar generator. These devices are fairly regularly on sale, so I suggest never paying full price for one. But offers in the Black Friday sales we have at the moment are pretty good here in the UK, and I suspect that applies elsewhere too. When deciding what to have, if you need something very quiet, then it's probably a choice between this and the DJI Power 1000. That's the other quiet model I've seen, judging by other people's reviews. Having said that, the DJI Power series is a bit unusual in that some functionality is delivered through optional external accessories. Factor those into the decision making, both the extra cost and the extra bulk. The Delta 3 is the only series I know of that has the time of use mode built in, so if that's important to you, then bear that in mind. You can get something similar from other devices, some that offer automation for example, but it'll be somewhat more difficult to do so. If neither noise nor time of use matter to you, then consider other options on the market. Most of those are also on offer at the moment. An example is the EcoFlow Delta 2, which is quite a lot cheaper than the 3. What's more, if you're after an EcoFlow expansion battery, even for the Delta 3, then the batteries in the Delta 2 range offer better value. Because the expansion batteries have no active cooling system, they don't make any noise, so the slight style change, the lower cycle life, and the location of the expansion port are the only disadvantages. Even then, remember that the cycle life refers to the number of cycles before you can expect it to drop to 80% of the original capacity. The quoted cycle lives are not the total number of cycles the cells will do. They should last a lot longer than that. If you do consider buying a solar generator, then check prices at multiple retailers. You can often buy them direct from the manufacturer through Amazon or eBay for less than on their own website. Alright, that's enough of me. What do you think? Do you have an EcoFlow product? And if so, how has the support been for it if you've needed it? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be very interested to hear about your experiences. If you can share those below, then it will help other people with their buying decisions. And by all means, ask any questions you might have in that section as well. If you've liked this week's video, then it will be a huge help to me if you click the thumbs up button. And I would love to have you as a subscriber of the channel if you want to see more from me. Thanks.